Okay, morning. We are starting the top of Yotes Amud Aleph. So we're really in the middle of a question here. The Mishnah implied that we on Yotes Amud Beis that if you make a neder stam and you don't specify what exactly you intend, so we'll often take the more chamor approach. We're going to be machmir. And the Gemara questioned that by the fact that there's a Mishnah which says Safek Nazirus Lahakel, that if you have a Safek with respect to a Nazir, it's unclear. Somebody says something in order to be a Nazir, and it's unclear what exactly they said under the circumstances. It's Safek. We're Mekil, and the person doesn't become a Nazir. So how do we reconcile these two Mishnayos? So Reb Zera suggests that Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says Safek Nazirus Lahakel, and our Mishnah is Rabbanan. And what was the proof? The proof they brought for that was this case of the koi, that the Mishnah in Tahara says if you're makdish, you say you're going to be makdish behema and chaya. So what's the status of a koi? A koi is a safek behema, safek chaya. So Rabbi Eliezer says lo hikdish, it doesn't work, and Rabbanan say it works. So those are the two opinions. Rabbi Eliezer is lahakel, and Rabbanan are machmir. So now the Aryai asked the question at the start of Yotes Amud Aleph. Amar le Aryai. B'mayu kimtel esafek nazirus lahakel kirebi Eliezer. So that you determined that safek, you said safek nazirus lahakel, the author of that is Rabbi Eliezer. Now I have a problem. Ema seifa. But look at the ending of that Mishnah itself. The ending of the Mishnah is safek bechoros. Echad bechori adam, echad bechori behema, bein tamea, bein tahora, hamoti mechaveru alav araya. The case if you have a safek bechor, it's unclear whether this man or animal, this boy I guess, this boy or animal is a bechor or not. The safek being whether the woman miscarried before, if she miscarried or the animal miscarried the first time, so then this animal or child is not bechor. So let's say it's a safek. So in that case, amoti mechaveru alav haraya. So what's the case? So if you look in Rashi, amoti mechaveru. So the case is kohen debayla fuke mine. So the kohen now, he has right to the bechor. So he says, give me that animal. And now, but you say, I'm not sure if it's a bechor. So the kohen has to bring proof that the animal is a bechor. He has to, the kohen has to bring a proof that the woman or the animal, let's say the animal in this case, never miscarried a first time. But then the Rashi just answered the itafas. But let's say the kohen, doesn't wait for, he doesn't want to bring a raya. He sees the animal and he just takes it, and he says, well, it's a bechor. And then this other person says, well, it's a safek bechor. But now who has the chazak on it? Now the kohen is in possession. So the itafas lehu kohen, then al habaylim lahavi raya. Then it flips, and then the bailim, the owner has to bring a raya that the animal is not a bechor. To love bechorhu. So this is really all a sugya, very complicated sugya in Bab Mitzia, Vavam Beis, Zayina, Takfa Kohen. The Shach has a whole sefer on, called Takfa Kohen. It's a very complicated sugya in Bab Mitzia, but that's the idea here. But that's not even so relevant to what we need. But if you go back to the Gemara, so that's the case of Safek Bechoros. And how do we paskin regarding Safek Bechoros? Back to the Gemara. V'tani alav v'asurim begiza v'avoda. When it comes to a Safek Bechor, so then it's forbidden to shear the animal, and it's forbidden to work the animal. These are things which are forbidden for a Bechor. So we're treating it as a Safek Bechor, but we're treating it l'chumra. So if we're treating it l'chumra, why is it Safek Bechor? Whether the Bechor is Kadosh or not, we're going l'chumra. But in the beginning, when it's Safek Koi, whether it's Makdish, we're l'kula. So meaning, you have to choose Rabbi Eliezer. Meaning, you have to... it seems to be, if Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says the koi, then how can he be the one who says this? Now, truthfully, I think there's two matters going on here. First of all, there seems to be an internal contradiction in the Mishnah, because the Reisha of the Mishnah says, regarding the koi, it's not kadosh, right? And then the Seifa is saying, so in the Reisha it's Safek L'Kula, and the Seifa is Safek L'Chumra. So that in itself is a contradiction. But what we're doing, seemingly what's more important to us, what we're bringing here, is how can you say Rabbi Eliezer says Safek L'Kula, right? Safek Nazirus L'Kula, if here he's saying L'Chumra. So the Gemara answers...
Let me just clarify. There's two different types of Safek here. The Safekas are not the same. One is an intrinsic
You're going to say that.
Well, that's pretty much the answer. If I understand what you're saying, that's going to be the answer. Because I'll read the answer. I'll read the answer, and you'll tell me if that's what you're thinking. Okay. So let's go on to the answer. The answer is Amar Le Amai Ka Midamis. How can you compare the two the two cases. So what are the two cases? Rashi is telling us, how can you compare Kedushas Bechor? So why? Actually, let's read on the Gemara, and then we'll go to Rashi. So Amai Kamidam is, how can you compare the two cases? Kedusha haba me'eleha li kedusha haba bidei adam. How can you compare the case of the Bechor to the case of the Koi? When it comes to the Bechor, that's Kedusha me'eleha, right? That Bechor, you're not doing anything to it. Now the pasuk says, truth is even for a Bechor that makdish, so that's in Ra'eh. But the idea is, the Gemara talks about why you have to do that. But it happens me'eleha. Bechor, Kedushas Bechor, if an animal or a person's born as Bechor, they have Kedusha right there. So when it comes to that, maybe for there will be Machmir. We'll say L'chumra. But when it comes to whether a man is being it, right, not Kedusha Ba Me'eleha, rather it's Bidei Adam, so then it's a Safek. So maybe then in that case will be, when you have a Safek, will be L'kula. What would be the difference between these two cases? If you look in the Ran, Amai Kamidam is Kedusha Ba Me'eleha, Kedusha Ba Bidei Adam. Why? Mishum de Kedusha Ba Bidei Adam, because when it comes to something which man, you need man's initiative in order to make it Kadosh, Hu de Ikal Meimar, de Hai Gavra, Lo Gamar, Liluye Nafshe. So it could be when we're coming, what was the man's intention when you're dealing with, again, man's initiative, then you're dealing with kavana. So if you're dealing with this kavana, so maybe when it comes to a safek, you never had kavana in such a case to make it kadosh. But if it happens automatically, you can't say there's no kavana involved. There's no, you can't. Oh, maybe you didn't intend to make it kadosh in this case. It's not even in his. It's not in his hand. It's not in his right to make it kadosh. You can't compare the two. You can't compare one case to the other. And that's, so the truth of the matter is, so let's go, actually, if we go to the Ran, I think beforehand, he's going to ask a question. He's going to deal with it with the next case as well. But what I noted before is that it's a question of Rabbi Eliezer, but it's also an internal contradiction. So V'tanya Allah Surim Begiza V'avoda. So he says, Seifa de Masnisin Gufa, the Safik Nazirus Lahakel Hi. Behachi Parich. And this is the question. If we said that the halacha of Safek Nazirus Lahakel is not according to Rabbi Eliezer, so then Lo Kashya Reisha is Seifa. So then it wouldn't be an internal contradiction in the Mishnah and Taharos. Why? The Reisha, the Safek Nazirus Lahakel, or because why? Mishum de Gufo lo me'ayel inesh l'sfeika. The Seifa, the Safek Bechoros, Kevan de Mamonahu, Amrina de me'ayel inesh mamona l'sfeika. We could have made a distinction. What could have the distinction been? The distinction could have been that Nazirus has to do with a man and Bechor has to do with property. So you could say that when it comes to when it comes to Nazirus, maybe you'll say you'll be Mekil because you don't want to make yourself Kadosh. But when it comes to the property, you would say it is Kadosh. But now that we know, Rabbi Eliezer says Safek Nazirus Lahakel, and he doesn't make any distinctions between Mammon, between property, and between himself, so therefore, what they end up with is the question for Rabbi Eliezer. So that was the question, and we answered it saying, no, it's not a problem for Rabbi Eliezer, again, because you can't compare Kedusha Haba Bidei Adam like Kedusha Haba Me'eleha. So then the Gemara goes back. So Ela'i Kasha HaKasha. If we have a question, Rabbi Eliezer, it's the following question. Safek mashkin litame tame litame acherim tahor divi Rabbi Meir b'chein haya Rabbi Elazar omer kidvarav. So what's this case of Safek mashkin? So Rashi tells us Safek mashke l'chol tumas mashkin kari Safek. Whenever you're dealing with a case of whether a liquid is tame, so then we call it a safek. Why? Mishum delays lehu ikar mina Torah. The Torah never says anything about the potential for liquids to become tamei. Lefi shelo matzinu tuma lamashkin. The Torah never discusses such a case. The Torah never discusses the case of tuma regarding mashkin. So what do we paskin? So the case that we just said is li tamei tamei. So if the safek is li tamei, next Rashi likabel tuma la'atzman vaday tamein. If you have a safek whether this liquid itself became tamei, so then we're going to be machmir. So safek whether this liquid came in contact with something which is tamei, we'll say it's tamei. However, aval li tamei achirim tehorim. What's that case? That case is, but if the safek is whether this liquid came in contact with something else, so then the something else is going to be tahor. So again, li tamei, tamei means if the suffix is whether this liquid itself is tamei, so we'll go l'chumra, we'll say it's tamei. If the question is whether this liquid touched something else to make that tamei, so we're going to say it's tahor.
The liquid's ability to transmit.
Yeah. Well, again, we're dealing with a suffix here. The question, it does have the ability, but if it's suffix, so we're going to be making. So, okay, why? So now, and we said Rabbi Elazar agrees with this. Now the Gemara asks, Misvele the Rabbi Elazar li tamei tamei? Does Rabbi Elazar really hold that if there's a suffix, whether the liquid itself is tamei, that it's actually tamei? Vehatanya, we have a brisa. Rabbi Elazar Omer in tuma lamashkin kolikar. He says there's no concept of tuma with regards to liquids. Teida, and what's my proof? Sheharei Heid Yosef ben Yoezer ish tzreira, because Yosef ben Yoezer testified, Al ayil kamtza dachan ve'al mashkin beis mitbachya dachan. Okay, the first case isn't important. The first case he testifies about is that a certain grasshopper, kamtza, which is called an ayal, that's kosher. Dachan, the Ran tells us tahor v'kasher le'achila. And also ve'al mashkin beis mitbachya dachan. Regarding the liquids in the beis mitbachya, those are also dachan, those are also tahor. What is that? What's tumas beis mitbachya? So the Ran tells us valmashke beis mitbachya dachan. What the beis mitbachya is that was where they slaughtered all the animals in the Beis Hamikdash. So you had lots of blood and lots of liquid and lots of juices flying out in that area. Okay, so the Ran tells us techeva the tumas mashkin midrabanan. Since tumas mashkin are only derabanan, b'mashke beis mitbachya lo gazru. The Chachamim decided that when it came to the liquids in the beis mitbachya, they're not going to ever become tamei. Why? Shelo laharbos tuma be'azara, because it's so close to the Beis Hamikdash. They don't want everything becoming tamei. So how do you avoid everything becoming tamei? You say there is no tuma when it comes to these liquids. B'chein the tumas mashkin midrabanan hechi machmirim b'svakahu. So that's what we're going to come to right now. So what's the problem? The problem seems to be that in the second case, when it comes to the mashkin beis mitbachya, it's clear that it's derabanan, and therefore, since derabanan, the rabbis can say it doesn't apply in this case. So if that's true, if mashkin are only derabanan, so why is it in the first case he's saying safek l'chumra? We should say safek derabanan l'kula. So we have a question here on Rabbi Elazar. So now we're gonna limit it a bit. We're gonna say Hanicha l'Shmuel. According to Shmuel, there's no question. Why? De'amar dachan miletamei acherim aval tumas atzman yesh bahen. Because the Mishnah used an ambiguous phrase. The phrase was be'amashkin beis mitbachya dachan. So what does dachan mean? So according to Shmuel, what dachan means is that it's not that it never can become tamei. It just means that if it touches something else, the other thing will not become tamei. So if that's the case, then there's no contradiction, because what he's saying in the Reisha and the Seifa is the same. In the Reisha he's saying, safek with respect to the Tuma itself is going to be the Chumrah. And the Seifa also is saying, again, when it comes to the Tuma of the Mashkin itself, nobody's questioning that. We're only questioning its capacity to make other things Tameh. So that works according to Shmuel. Ela l'Rav, de Amar Dachan Mamish, according to the Rav who thinks that no, in the second brisa it means that there is no tuma with mashkin whatsoever, it's only the Rabbanan, Ma'ika l'meimar. So then we have this contradiction within Rabbi Elazar. So again, we have this internal contradiction within Rabbi Elazar, but what does that have to do with Safek Nazirus Lahakel? How does this relating? Again, all we're trying to do is we're trying to refute the fact that Rabbi Elazar is the author of Safek Nazirus Lahakel. And we're doing that by bringing this contradiction with what he holds with respect to the Tuma of liquid. So how does one relate to the other? So let's read the Ran. I think the Ran's going to explain what exactly is going on here. The Ran Ma'ika L'Meimar. So the Ran tells us, Ma'ika L'Meimar, Have lan lemezel bisfakayu l'kula. So what we want to say is the same way Rabbi Elazar says, Safek Nazirus Lahakel, he should say the same thing for the Tuma, Safek Tuma Lahakel. And the fact that he said in the first case, again, Safek is Machmir, so therefore that's the question. So then the Ran asks, B'chi Tema Im Kain, Afilu lo mukminan had the Safek Nazirus Lahakel Rabbi Elazar, Heichinicha ha'akati kashet Rabbi Elazar to Rabbi Eliezer. He says, well then, forget this whole Safek Nazirus Lahakel. You still have this internal contradiction within Rabbi Eliezer. That in the first case, he says Safek with the mashkin is tamei, and then in the second case, he says it's durabanan. So if it's durabanan, how could he say that it's lekula? Right? Daha, continuing the run, Daha Amar Behedji the Tumas Mashkin Midrabanan, because he says that it's Durabanan, Kidiktani Ain Tuma Lamashkin Kolikar, Viafilu Hachi Bisfakayu Lechumra. But nevertheless, he's paskening that Safek Lechumra, Kidiktani, V'chein Haya Rebbe Azer Omer Kidvarav, Allah Dahayi Safek Mashkin Tambe Tambe. So Yesh Lomar. So now he's going to explain how everything relates to each other. Tahachi Parich, this is the question. If we said that Safek Nazirus Lahaka wasn't like Rabbi Eliezer, it was like somebody else, so then lo kasha. You wouldn't have this internal contradiction. Why not? Because we could have said as follows: Rabbi Eliezer machmir besafek afilu b'drabanan. We could say that Rabbi Eliezer, it's true, he says it's drabanan, but maybe he's safek, maybe he says safek drabanan l'chumra, and that wouldn't be an internal contradiction. But once we know that Rabbi Eliezer already tells us that Safek Nazirus Lahakel, Nihi Dahavi Kedusha Babi de Adam, true that Nazirus is different because that's coming from man's initiative. But Heichi Adifa Tuma Durabanan, Afal Bi Shehiba Meileha, Minazirus Derais Afal Bi Shehiba Bi de Adam. Once Rabbi Eliezer is the one who's telling us Safek Nazirus Lahakel, when it comes to Deoraisa, we're going to be Mekil. How could he tell us that when it comes to Safek Durabanan L'chumra? So meaning, if he never said Safek Nazirus Lahakel, and all we knew was these two teachings about Tuma with Mashkin, so we say, okay, he holds Tumas Mashkin is Durabanan, but he also thinks that Safek Durabanan L'chumra. But once he tells us that Safek Nazirus is Lahakel, where he even has cases of Deoraisa which are Mekil, so we can't answer Safek Durabanan l'chumra. Obviously, he's going to have to be l'kula in that case, and that's the whole question, and why that's how we're rejecting the fact that Rabbi Eliezer is the one who's saying safek nazirus lehakel. Okay, so that rejects that whole answer. So let's go back to the Gemara now. I think that was the most complicating part of this Gemara. So let's go on. Ella, so how are we going to answer the contradiction between our Mishnah and the Mishnah of Safek Nazirus Lahakel? Ha Reb Yehuda v'ha Reb Shimon. No, because we're dealing with Reb Yehuda and Reb Shimon. Tanya, with the following brisa: Hareini Nazir, im yesh bakri hazeh mea kor. So a man says, I'm going to be a Nazir if there's 100 kor in this pile of wheat. The halach, and then he goes to check it out. Umatzo shenignav osha'avad, and then he finds out that part of the wheat was stolen and part of it was lost. So he can't really measure what he made his initial statement on. So Rabbi Yehuda Mati, Rabbi Yehuda says no. In that case, he won't become a Nazir. But Rabbi Shimon Oser, and Rabbi Shimon says Aser. So Rabbi Yehuda, who's Mekil here, Safek Nazirus Lahakel, is obviously the author of Safek Nazirus Lahakel. Rabbi Shimon who's Machmir here, saying Safek L'chumra, so he's the author of our Mishnah, also says Safek L'chumra. And then the Gemara asks, but Veremi to Rabbi Yehuda. But now we're going to have a problem with Rabbi Yehuda's sheet itself. Why? Mi Amar Rabbi Yehuda lo ma'ayil inish nafshi l'sfeika. You want to tell me that Rabbi Yehuda actually believes that a person will not make himself kadosh when dealing with the Safek? Or Amini, how about the ending of our Mishnah itself? Rabbi Yehuda Omer Stam Truma Bi Yehuda Asura Uvegalil Muteres. If you say that a certain food is going to be asur to you like Truma, so then in Yehuda it's going to be asur, in the Galil it's going to be mutter. Why? Because there's two types of Truma. Again, that's a suffix. Either Truma, like Truma Sagoren, with respect to your produce, and then you also have Truma with respect to Truma Salishka, which is something you don't dedicate to the base of Mikdash. So if you intended Truma Salishka, so then that's problematic, because since Truma Salishka is Aser, because by the fact that you made a neder, so if you say this is going to be Aser to me like that, then that will also be Aser to you. But if you say this is going to be Aser to me like Truma, with respect to produce, so you never had to make a neder to make that truma aser to you. So therefore, the neder you're making now doesn't work. So, but now let's say you say stam, you don't differentiate between truma salishka, truma sagorin. So in Yehuda where it's aser, and Galil it's mutter. Why? She'ein anshe hagalil makirin es truma halishka, because in the Galil they don't even know what truma salishka is. They're too far away. They don't even understand this idea of donating these things to the base of Mikdash. So why is the problem? So taima de'ein makirin. The only reason why the anshe Gedalia it's mutter is because they don't know what Trumas Alishka is. Hamakirin, if they knew what Trumas Alishka was and it was actually a suffix, what they meant, asurin. So it would be asur. Meaning, how can Rabbi Yehuda be the one who's telling us suffix is going to be Lekula, but at the end of the Mishnah with respect to Truma, he's telling us suffix is going to be Lechumra. So Amarava, no. Because Gabe Kri Kasavar Kolchas Feiko Chamor Mivadai Lo Me'ayo Nafshe Lisfeika. He says, you know why the case of the Kri is different? Why is Rabbi Yehuda Mekil in the case of the Kri, where again, if it's lost or if it's stolen, you're not going to become a Nazir? Because in that case, the Safek is more Chamor than the Vadai. So what does that mean? Let's go on in the Gemara. Di'ilu gabe nazir vadai megalech umevi korban v'nechal al sveika lo matzi megaleach. What he's saying is as follows. Let's say you become a vadai nazir. If you become a vadai nazir, so it's true for those, let's say for 2 months. So for those 2 months you can't do anything, you can't drink wine, can't cut your hair, etc. But at the end of those 2 months, there's an ending point to your nazirus. So how do you end it? You cut your hair, you bring a korban, etc. That's if you're a vadai nazir. What happens if you're a sapek nazir? If you're a Safek Nazir, you can't do that. You can't cut your hair, you can't bring a korban. Why? Because since you're only a Safek, you can't bring a korban. We'll read Rashi to explain why. So what Rav is explaining is, in a case where you make the statement, I'll be a Nazir if X happens, so that you have a Safek. So in that case, when the Safek is going to be more chamor than the Vadai, right? If you were a Vadai Nazir and it came true, so then you'd be able to end it. Now that it's only a Safek Nazir, you can't end it. So in such a case, when the Safek is more chamor than the Vadai, we're going to say he never intended to become a Nazir in the first place. So let's look at the Rashi just to explain our case a little bit. So Di'ilu Gabe Nazir Vadai. So when it comes to a Nazir Vadai, again, let's say you for sure became a Nazir. You made a statement which was clear you become a Nazir. Ika ha kula, you have a certain leniency associated with it. Why? Dilasof niziruso, at the end of the period, migaleach, umebi korban v'nechal. Again, you can shave and you can bring a korban and he could eat. The ilu safek nizirus, but let's say it's only a safek now. Why? Denignav akri, because now parts of the pile were stolen and you don't know how much was in there in the first place. Lo matzi megaleach, and then you can't shave. Why? Because you're only allowed to shave if you're going to bring a korban. But he's not allowed to bring a korban. Why? Because let's say he wasn't actually a Nazir. So so he's not bringing a proper korban. He's bringing chulin, something which isn't a korban, to the base of mikdash, which is a serious sin. So since that's the case, the Safek is going to be more chamor than the Vadai. Lo me'ayel nafshei b'hai sveika. He never intended to make himself a Nazir in such a case. Aval gabe truma, but when it comes to the Safek with truma, amrina me'ayel nafshei l'sveika. In that case, if it's only Safek, we're still going to say that it's asur to him. It's kadosh. Why? Diafilu amrina trumas halishka misveika. Lo have tfei chamura mi vadai, because in that case the chamur, if you said vadai l'trumas halishka, so you can't use it. If it's safek trumas halishka, you also can't use it. There's only more chamur in the safek case, and therefore we're going to say it's chal. When it comes to the nazirus, where the safek, whether you're a safek nazir, is more chamur than whether you're a vadai nazir, doesn't apply. So now the Gemara is going to ask about some permutations of that. Amarle Rafuna bar Yehuda, that back to the Gemara, the 5th line. L'Rava, Amar Harini Nazir Olamai. Let's say he didn't just say I want to become a Nazir. He says I want to become a Nazir forever. So if you want to become a Nazir forever, then there's no more chumrah associated with the safek. Why? Because even the vadai he can never end it. So maybe since he's a Nazir Olam, he can never end his Nazirus. So to safek he can never end his Nazirus. So maybe then the safek works as well. So Amrlei, no, Nazir Olam nami sfeiko chamor mivadai. The truth is, even when it comes to a Nazir Olam, there's a certain leniency associated with it. Why? Di'ilu vadai, if again he's vadai, he said I'm going to be a Nazir forever, so hichbid se'aro, mekal beta'ar, maybe shalosh behemos. So let's say his hair gets very heavy, it's not so easy never to cut your hair, so we allow him to cut his hair and bring a korban. V'ilu sfeiko, but again if he's a safek, Lo, then he's not allowed to do that. Why? Because he can't bring the korban. Again, it might be chuli lazara. Therefore, he can't cut his hair. He can never cut his hair. So therefore, there's another chumrah associated with the safek. So again, in that case, he didn't intend either. Now, the next case, Amar Harini Nazir Shimshon Mai. Nazir Shimshon isn't even allowed to cut his hair if it's too heavy. So if he makes that statement, so then what's the case? Because again, here the safek and the vadai are going to be on the same level. Amar Le Nazir Shimshon Lotanya. It's true. Nazir Shimshon wasn't taught in this case. If he actually said Nazir Shimshon and it was a safek, he would actually be a Nazir. Amar Le, is that true? V'hamar Avada Barava Tanya Nazir Shimshon. Yeah, but he has a teaching where Nazir, even if you say Nazir Shimshon, he's not going to be a Nazir. So Amar Le Itanya Tanya. It's true. If you see, I can't argue with the fact that he says that. I just don't have a svara for that, because in this case, for Nazir Shimshon, the safek and the vadai are on the same level of stringency. So there's no reason why the safek shouldn't be chal. So he doesn't know how to explain that. He doesn't know how to explain those rabbis who say that even for Nazir Shimshon, it's not going to be chal. So we have another answer here. So Rav Ashi Amar, no, because there's another answer. I have another way to explain everything, which will include why even if he says Nazir Shimshon and it's a safek, it's not going to be chal. Hahi Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Tarfonhi. This teaching regarding the Nazir and the Kri and the pile and determining how much is in there is all according to Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Tarfon. Detanya. Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Rabbi Tarfon Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rabbi Tarfon. Ein echad mehem Nazir lefi shelo nitna nazirus ela lehafla'a. So what does that mean? What case are they talking about? So if you look in Rashi here, Ein echad mehem Nazir. So Rashi tells us here's the case. Shnayim shayu omdim. Reuben and Shimon are standing together. Ve'amar echad hareini Nazir imzeh ish ploni sheba kenegdenu. So Reuben says, if that's Shimon coming towards us, I'm going to be. Reuben and Shimon are standing together. If Reuben says, if that's Levi coming towards us, I'm going to become a Nazir. And Shimon says, okay, let's make this fun. Ve'idach amar hareini Nazir imenohu. And if that's not Levi, Shimon says, I'm going to be a Nazir. So seemingly between the two of them, you're dealing with a Nazir, okay? Not the case. That's the point. So in that case, Ein echad mehem Nazir. Neither of them, Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Tarfon said Nazir. Why? Hoil uvishas haneder lo haya bar lechad mehen. Since neither of them made a clear statement that I'm going to become a Nazir. They both made al tanai. If this happens, then I'll become a Nazir. So it seems that it's a Nazirus al tanai. It's not a clear statement. I will become a Nazir. So then it doesn't work. Next Rashi, shelo nitna Nazirus elo lahafla. Which Rashi explains, you need to make a clear statement. I'm going to become a Nazir. It needs to be hafla, needs to be a clear statement. You need to know for sure at the point where you're saying it whether you're going to become a Nazir. If you're throwing some condition into it, it's not going to work. So since that's the case, in all these cases of the Kri, even if he's Nazir Shimshon, it's not going to work because it wasn't a clear statement. He didn't say, I'm going to become a Nazir. He's saying, if this happens, if there's that amount in this Kri, I'm going to become a Nazir.
So if you need to have a clear statement, how could you have a Nazir who's a suffix, which we said previously?
If you need to have a clear statement...
Yeah, how can you have a...
That's the point. Safek Nazirus Lakula. This is all according to Rabbi Yehuda. We want to say Rabbi Yehuda is the opinion of Safek Nazirus Lakula, and we're fitting that into here. We're saying this is a Safek and it's Lakula. He's not going to be a Nazir. That's correct. So, but now the Gemara is going to ask the question, Ihachi, if that's the case, so it needs to be a clear statement, and so Ma'ir Yeshanignav Osha Abad. Then why does that case need, if it's stolen or if it's lost and you can't count, so then he's not going to be a Nazir. Either way, he's not going to become a Nazir according to Rabbi Yehuda because it wasn't a hafla. It wasn't made initially with this statement that I'm going to become a Nazir. It's based on how much is in there. Well, that's not going to work. Yeah. So, right. Let's look at
Rabbi Yehuda.
Right. Look at the Rashi. Ma'ir ya nignav afilu isa be'ene. Even if the pile was intact in Nami, he wouldn't become a Nazir. Because at the time we made the net, there wasn't certain whether he was going to become a Nazir. Even if he could have measured it, it wouldn't have become a Nazir. So if that's the case, so what is it? Why do you need to throw that in? So the Gemara answers, Ella lahodiyacha kocho de Rabbi Shimon. You're right. According to Rabbi Yehuda, either way, he's not going to become a Nazir. But this is all telling you, even according to tell you the extent of Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Even according to Rabbi Shimon, who said sapek l'chumra, in a case where it's lost or stolen, you can't even measure it. Still, in that case, he's going to say kasavar me'ayel inish nafshe l'sfeika. He's still going to say that the safek is enough to make him a Nazir. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, this whole idea of it being stolen or lost is meaningless because either way he's not going to become a Nazir. According to Rabbi Shimon, the chiddush according to Rabbi Shimon, the Rabbi Shimon who says safek he will be. Maybe in a case where it's stolen, you can't even measure it, he would be Mekel. Says no, even in that case, we're going to be Machmir. Let's just do the last case here. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Stam Truma Yehuda. This is based on the ending of our Mishnah. So we said in the first case, Hamakirin, if they knew what Truma Salishka was, Asurin, Alma Sfeika L'chumra. But then Ema Seifa, but then the next statement in the Mishnah is Stam Chramim Yehuda Mutarim Uvegalil Asurin. That if you make a statement that something's going to be consecrated, so again the suffix is whether it's being consecrated to Hashem or to the Kohen. To Hashem is a problem, to the Kohen is not a problem. I think those are the two. Sorry, one sec. Yeah, exactly. So Stam Chramim Yehuda Mutarin Uvegalil Asurin. So Stam, if you say Cherem in Yehuda, it's mutter. Why? Because again, they're closer to the Kohanim, so they know this idea of Cherem LeKohen. But in the Galil, it's Aser. They don't understand this idea of Cherem LeKohen. She'ein Anshe HaGalil Makirin Eschar Me HaKohanim. Therefore, the Cherem they say obviously is referring to Cherem to Hashem. But Hamakirin, let's say in the Galil they did know what Cherem LaShem meant, Cherem LeKohen meant. So Mutarin would have been mutter. Alma Sfeika Lekula. So the Truma case implied Sfeika Lechumra. The last case implies Sfeika Lekula. How can Rabbi Yehuda? It's contradiction. So Amar Abaye Seifa Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Sadoki. No, these are not both Rabbi Yehuda. The Truma case is Rabbi Yehuda. The Chramim, the Cherem case is Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Tzadok. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Stam Truma Yehuda Asura, and Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Tzadok Omer Stam Chramim Begalil Asurin. So there's no contradiction. We're just saying one's according to Rabbi Yehuda, one is according to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok. Okay, we'll stop here. Have a good day.